Robert Burch. I want to welcome you to the fourth and final panel discussion. You know you've been here for a long day today, so you're almost there. All right. Thank you for staying. We appreciate to see your smiling face and hear the excitement and the conversation that's going on in between panels and at lunch and things. It really seems like people have been able to gain some things and pull some things from the discussion that we hope might help. Our final panel here is called Race, Religion, and Community. This is going to be more or less a Q&A and open discussion where I'm going to be asking questions and we'll have your panelists answer those questions for you. So I'm going to take a little time to introduce our panelists, but before I do that, I'm going to take a little privilege, and I hope you don't mind. I am the president of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, the Utah chapter. AUGS has 33 chapters nationwide, and we're one of those 33. We've been around going on 12 years now here in Utah. I want to bring that out because I am just so excited and so pleased about the number of people from our organization that has participated in this event this weekend. And so I want to introduce a couple of them to you. Well, actually, all of them that I see, I'm going to introduce to you. Okay, I am the president, the current president. One of our long-standing members, well, I should say two of our long-standing members, are Darius Gray and Dr. Ron Coleman down here at the end of the panel.
I'm going to pay my dues, man.
He and Darius are very good friends and emeritus on our board, and we really appreciate their wisdom and their time that they always spend with us. Our vice president, you've met already as well, Ms. LaShawn Williams. Our secretary, you have met, Alice Burch. Our historian was mentioned earlier. Wave your hand there, Taryn Mitchell. And our two newest members, Sister Betty Sawyer and W. Paul Reeves. Yes, Paul is a member of AUGS. I can't forget to mention Paul because I want all y'all to hear that now, okay? We accept everybody, so come on down and join our organization. All righty. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm going to introduce everyone, including myself, and then I'm going to take 5 or 10 minutes to make a couple of statements since they're going to have the remainder of the time. My name is Robert Burch. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and attended Talladega College. Talladega College was one of the first historically black colleges in the United States. 3 were curated before the end of the Civil War, a couple of years after the Civil War, and 1 year there was 9 created. Talladega was one of those schools. I've served in the United States Navy, serving in the Caribbean, South America, and in the Mediterranean. I currently work at Park City Group, downtown Salt Lake City, in food safety and compliance. I am a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity, which is a service organization that is primarily, notice I said primarily, not all, primarily African-American men worldwide who render community service. I am the president of the Utah chapter of the Historical and Genealogical Society here that I mentioned before, and we initiate historic preservation projects, assist members in community to collect their family histories, and we think that's very important that you collect your family history, because until you collect your family history, most actual historians don't know the history of this country. So by you doing that work, it literally gives them a basis of writing this history. And so since black folks have been left out of it so long, it's imperative that we write our history for our families so that we benefit the rest of the country. I am a board member of the Sons and Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage, the first ever black lineage society created. It's similar to Sons and Daughters of Pioneers and those type of lineage societies. I also serve on the Juneteenth Committee as a founding member of the Utah Black Roundtable. I am the Family History Director for the Genesis Group and Sunday School teacher. So I'm going to have to get out of here quick today so I can go get ready for Sunday School tomorrow. And get ready to teach my class. So let's start here. The first person on my right here is Sister Betty Sawyer. She graduated from Morgan State University and has a BS in physical education. And I want to let you know Morgan State also is a historical black college. She earned a second bachelor's degree in physical therapy and her master's degree in public administration from the University of Utah. As the director of the Governor's Office of Black Affairs, she gained passage of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday and establishment of the Utah Martin Luther King Holiday Commission. She worked with the legislature and the Board of Regents to secure $1 million in funding to support a minority scholarship endowment. At the University of Utah, Betty served as the African-American Program Coordinator, Black Student Union Advisor, and the Center of Ethnic Student Affairs. Betty currently works at Weber State University in Access and Diversity as the Coordinator for Community Engagement, where she has established several special projects, including the Men of Color and Families United Parent Engagement Program, and serves as the Black Scholars United Advisor. She is a life member and current president of the Ogden branch of the NAACP. She is founder of Project Success Community Learning Center, a grassroots nonprofit focused on health disparity reductions, cultural arts, youth leadership, and advocacy. Betty is the president of the annual Utah Juneteenth Festival, and as of this month, also the president of the Utah Black Roundtable. Next is Sister Audia Wells. She's a graduate of Emory University with a BA in International Studies and a graduate of BYU's Marriott School of Management with an MA in International Development and Organizational Behavior. She is a seasoned HR generalist and organizational behavior professional with a broad range of leadership and advisory positions. In 2005, she founded Tilt HR Consulting, through which she trains, integrates, leads, and transforms to promote change, access, and economic growth in businesses and communities. Audia sings with the Saints Unified Voices Choir, a choir founded and led by Gladys Knight, and through which she spreads the message of the restored gospel of Jesus. Audia also works as regional manager of LDS Self-Reliance Services, where she trains leaders in the LDS Church in Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois on assisting members toward greater self-reliance through education, personal finance, and entrepreneurship and employment. Dr. Ronald Coleman is a professor emeritus in the University of Utah History Department in Ethnic Studies program, where he taught for 42 years. And I know he doesn't like the title, but I keep trying to push it on him. You know, you guys have heard of Carter G. Wilson, right? Well, we call Ronald Coleman and Oggs our Utah father of black history. Yes. He has done great research and focus on African-American history and has published a lot of that online. He has presented at a variety of conferences. His publications include essays on Western black history, Western black history. I just want y'all to hear that. We talking about black cowboys, okay? Coleman's involvement in history, education, and community service is exemplified by his teaching awards at the University of Utah, the Utah Humanities Council Governor's Award, and the Days of 47 Pioneers of Progress Award for Historic and Creative Arts. Alrighty. So since most of these questions are going to be directed towards these folks, I'm going to take 5 or 10 minutes and just make a couple of little statements from the things that I've heard this weekend, as well as some of the other thoughts I've had as an organizer of history. As the president of OGS, I don't necessarily get to do a lot of research and things like that. I spend more time trying to keep the organization running properly and getting people like Taryn and Alice and our genealogists, Stephen DeBees, the ideas, material, and the work and the support that they need to make sure it operates. But I want everyone to know that history is to inform us and educate us, and not just to inform and educate, but to uplift. And we have to direct the lens in which we see that history, as was said on previous panels, to positive things, which is sometimes difficult when you're looking at Jim Crow, oppression, slavery, young black men being shot in the street. It's hard to be positive and uplifting when you're looking at that. I had a member of my ward say, oh, well, why don't you want to participate in, what's the little pioneer thing with the little car?
Trek.
Why don't you want to participate? And I said, well, you know, when I did my family history research, they were all slaves, sharecroppers, tenant farmers. So culturally, that didn't have anything to do with me. So she gave me that kind of strange look, as we all get, like, oh, I didn't think about that. You know, but here's the thing: when we are able to do that, and I believe it was Garcia, wasn't it Elder Garcia, who made that statement about people gain strength from within when they know who they are. Our children do better in school. They're more self-confident. But the one thing I think is most important is that they are self-contained. So that means when they're around their peers, pressure doesn't necessarily affect them in the way that it would affect other kids who need other kids' friendship in order to feel self-fulfilled. When our children are self-contained and know who they are, know their family and where they're from, they get better grades, they do better in school, they're just better people. Okay? So doing history is very important. One of the things I want to say was we have to kind of define what we think B1 and unity is. And I think in that discussion sometimes we get confused. Unity does not mean that we are monolithic, right? Unity does not mean that we are one thing. We're not trying to change into one person. What we're trying to do is unite ourselves with all of our different talents and skills and culture to make this church first stronger, so that we can make this country stronger. And I think y'all heard someone say that earlier. So that we can first make this church stronger, so that we can make this country stronger, so we can make the Lord's world stronger. But never get confused that just because your culture is this, that your culture, this other person's culture is not comparable or is good. The unifying thing with us is going to be the truth of the gospel, period. The gospel is the meat of our existence. Our culture are the spices we decide to put on that meat. Right? Just because I like a little Cajun seasoning doesn't make masala bad, right? So when we look at, and I want to address this because I don't see the brother up there now. Maybe he's still there, with the concern that if we have black wards who want to support a culture that they're familiar with, that we're somehow not united. We are united in the gospel. That doesn't mean that I can't sing gospel music, that I shouldn't be able to say amen in our ward meetings on Sunday. We should not confuse you thinking that if I am not reverent in church, I have not accepted or assimilated a European culture that's not necessarily important to the culture that I came out of. And I think that's what we confuse sometimes, is that when they're saying we need to be one, a lot of times what our European brothers and sisters are saying is that you need to convert to our culture and not necessarily our gospel. And so when we get those two things confused, then we have those ill feelings about, wow, those black folks are really loud in Genesis on that first Sunday. Right? Because they're not used to people saying amen and standing up and clapping and singing gospel music. So don't let our culture mislead you to think that we don't know the gospel. The gospel is going to reunite us in every culture, in every faith, every place in the world. There was a comment made about strong black women. So I really don't need the strong black women to necessarily respond to this.
Can't silence nobody, man.
I know y'all already know what you want to say.
My mic ready.
This conversation came up. I'm running for House District 30 out in West Valley. This conversation came up when we was talking to women about sexual mistreatment as we was going from school to school and things of that nature. And this is one thing here in, this is supposedly the land of Zion, that I really, really want our white sisters to take to heart. Hear this. Do not allow any man to tell you that you cannot develop your talent. Do not let any man tell you you shouldn't get an education. Do not allow any man to say that you cannot attain more. Do not allow any man to tell you that your place is what I say it is. Because I know my wife and I share a relationship, and trust me, she would tell me if I'm trying to dominate a relationship. But here in this land we call Zion, the sisters should not accept being treated anyway, but with respect. Period. That also implies to all of the brothers, red, yellow, black, white, and brown, you need to learn how to treat your wife with respect. Okay? So we're going to go ahead on to the questions and answer sections here. This particular discussion is on race and community and religion. This panel considers the way race intersects in church and community when racial issues percolate nationally, such as police shootings, the Charlottesville violence, National Anthem sports protests. Black Latter-day Saints sometimes feel invisible among their white congregants. Conversely, while local black churches and community, such as the Utah Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society and the Utah Black Roundtable, address racial issues regularly, they must do it in a community dominated by white Latter-day Saints. So So we want to discuss this intersectionality and to have you understand that intersectionality is subjective and is formed by mutual interlocking and reinforcing of categories of race, gender, class, health, wealth, and sexuality. I also want to add to that religion. So we want to talk about how to be mindful in a rich community of humans that we find in our world as well as in our church. And so I want to, the very first question I want to ask the panel here, from your point of view, what blessing, joys, opportunities do you feel the greater community misses out on when we separate ourselves by race and use religion to support that segregation? Anyone who wants to take it?
I guess I'll start. Hello, how's everybody today? Good to see you. I think first and foremost, we miss out on the opportunity to have conversations and interactions as we're having today, to be able to glean from each other's intellectual capacity, our cultural background, to be able to work more closely together, learn from one another, and enter into safe spaces where we can have courageous conversations around racial differences, racial bias, as well as working together to develop strategies to achieve equity.
To piggyback on what Ms. Betty was saying, I think similarly we really miss out on those rich relationships and the full extent of what God's love is supposed to be and how it's supposed to manifest, not only in the church but in community. And so one of the things that separation causes for me personally is it requires that I make a choice oftentimes between church, meaning the LDS church, and my family, who are not members. And so we knew Jesus before I got to the LDS church. We founded churches in Memphis and other places. And so historically, there's a choice that has to be made on how to reconcile my faith and beliefs and actions with the family, which is the most important unit in the gospel, right? So there's always these thinkings of how do we, or how do I close the gap for my personal situation, my family, myself, and how do those things reconcile, and what can I do to keep those things unified and pulled together?
Okay, it's on me now, I guess. Our perceptions are usually shaped, especially given the demographics of the Black community within the confines of Utah. So our perceptions are shaped about Black people based upon what we read, and most of us don't read very much positively about Black people, whether it's in the newspapers. We don't really go into the history books or read other literary works by Black authors. So the perceptions are shaped by what we read, what we hear, and you all know how susceptible we are to the gossip and rumors that people pass either through the media or just oral communication. By what we read, what we hear, and we all understand the power of the medium of the visual, television, what you see. And what you see for too long over the years was unrealistic, stereotypical portrayals of people of color in general, and particularly Black people. And those perceptions often turn into, for the majority population, to be their reality. And that is reaffirmed by incidents on a regular basis.
Okay. How can being mindful help overcome the subtle patterns and habits that perpetuate both religious divisions and racial divisions? Just in the idea of being mindful.
You know, I went to see Gladys Knight and the Pips, but I didn't see the Pips. And once I came to understand what I was attending and what, I really had a wonderful evening. But in the course of the evening, the highlight of the entire evening for me came when President Russell Nelson said and made his remarks. Now, I've lived in this community for almost 50 years, and there has only been one other occasion when I personally felt that this was opened up the clouds and a ray of sunshine came in. And that came in 1978 in the aftermath of President Kimball's revelation. And that just opened up all sorts of possibilities for a better state, better nation, better world. And then, and I don't know, President or Apostle Oaks had made his remarks, and they were okay. But when the prophet speaks, everybody listens. And I was just taken. I said, I have not in my lifetime or the time I've lived here heard a president of the Latter-day Saints Church say in such an eloquent way what he said. And I thought, I hope they play this over and over and over again. And that will mean that the membership don't have an excuse for their racism.
I don't have my glasses, so I'm trying to see my notes.
They're cheapies.
Oh, no, that won't work. I think we've really hit on it quite a few times already today, that it's really going to take more than the one-on-one personal relationships and efforts to address systematic issues in the church and racism in general, that we have to start out by looking at the things that we joke about. That we start off the morning watching the video on the touching of the hair, and you're black in the LDS church if someone's touching your hair, or what I also call a violation of my personal space without my permission. We've got to start being comfortable enough to tell people what's not appropriate. And that has to be okay for the hearer as well. In love, I think, the scriptures tell us oftentimes that we have to reprove people with love. There's nothing wrong with speaking a truth. If that is your truth, you're trying to help educate, you're trying to break down barriers, but you also have to have a certain level of self-love and self-care about, how people approach you and how they engage with you, both in and outside of the church. So we've talked about more of our white brothers and sisters being allies, and really addressing the systematic oppositions that we face every day and have to consider every day that they are not even thinking about most of the time. So.
Along that same line, when I think of mindfulness, I think of intentionality. When we get up in the morning, we make certain choices about what we're going to wear, what we're going to eat, how soon we're going to leave to go to work, those fun things. And I think when it comes to issues around race, around coming together and working together, we really have to pause and pay attention to our own internal barometer. barometers. What do we believe? How do we feel? How have our perceptions been shaped? And what is the impact of those perceptions? And are they real or not? And I think a lot of times we accept things without questioning if it's real. My son was sharing at his workplace, he's often asked about current political things. And when he responds to his coworkers and say, well, tell me about the black person that you know that acts like that or talks like that. Do you know someone? And they're like, no. So why do you believe that to be true? And so we have to check our own selves about how we think, believe, and act, and then being able to consider others the same way. And I don't think we spend enough time considering others. Oftentimes, we try to rush through something or brush it off. Why don't you just, or, you know, without really thinking about our history in this country and how that has shaped not only us as well as other people. So again, being mindful to me is you know, checking my own self every day, checking those who I'm around every day. And again, it's not to be offensive or anything, but if we don't have the courage to correct something or to speak up, it continues to be perpetrated, and we don't want that to happen.
All right, and now that just reminds me of something that you said a little bit earlier there, Betty, about creating safe spaces and also creating those situations to have those courageous conversations. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that.
That's something I do every day. I try to remind people I'm around, I'm not an animal. I'm human like you are. I think, I breathe, I eat, and let's talk. You know, it doesn't matter as long as we can be respectful in that conversation. That's the only way we move forward. This whole issue around the divides, those things that divide us, most people don't want to talk about it. They want to hurry up and skip over that and, you know, just talk about love, joy, and peace. Love, joy, and peace comes with a price. It just didn't happen. You know, there were some wars that went on to bring about love, joy, and peace. And so we're not willing to talk and allow people, you know, I let them know, hey, I'm cool, say what you need to say, and then we'll talk a little more until we get to those understandings. But again, I try to provide that safe space, and not just out of the workplace, even in my home. We're all in the same family, but my kids have different ideas about things than I did, the same way I had different ideas than my parents did. And so I give my children that safe place to have conversations and to disagree. And they have to figure that out. And so we need to be willing to relax so that we can figure those things out together.
Yeah. And I think someone made a comment earlier that we suffer from the idea that if we don't talk about it, it would go away.
Doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. Trust me, it doesn't happen. And that just made me think I want to, and again, there was someone who was here earlier, so I don't know if she's here or not. I think today we've had two questions about being an ally. Which is a very difficult question, I think, for everyone to answer, not just white folks, but black folks. Because Stevie Wonder had a line in an old song that went something like, if you really want to hear our view, you haven't heard nothing. So black folks have gotten to this point where we've said it and said it and said it and said it. So you clearly are not hearing. I bring that back up because one of the things that can help us move forward as far as answering these questions is the question in itself, right? What is the question that I'm asking to achieve what I want? And I'm going to put Audia on the spot here, since we talked about it just for a few minutes before we started here, about what are the questions in this mindfulness that people should be asking themselves. And once they find the right question, what are the actions they should take after they ask that question?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And we were talking about this in the context of ministering. And the question in the ministering effort is always, what can I pray for you about? What do you need? The ministering effort is actually finding out about a person enough so that you can know what needs they have. And so that you could either be both praying for them, helping them find resources to meet that need. There has to be some action there. And so asking the questions around finding out what they need, what their needs are as a family, as an individual. If you don't ask the right questions, you don't know them any better than you did before. So that's one reason why you ask questions, to get to know a situation, a person, etc. But asking the right questions really helps you uncover people. It helps you peel back the layers. And so when you're not asking questions, you're just dropping off cookies and running, and you count that as your ministering effort, then we get what we have right now.
And Ron, or anyone else want to address that while the question is there?
I don't know if I can really respond to that adequately, except that as long as, I don't mind anybody praying for me, as long as it's a simple prayer and sending it to the spirits of above with nothing else in mind. And I think, you know, especially black people are very funny about you trying to get in their space and their business. And so if you want to pray in the sense of asking the Lord for some help, that's one thing. But if you're praying with the idea that maybe in time he will see a way in which to start believing what I believe, that's off the table.
Exactly. Right. And so the reason I want to come back to that question is this. If you're sitting there and you're saying that I don't know what I should do as a white person, ask yourself what you would do if you was black. Right? So I started on trying to find these answers about 15 years ago with one question. And so since I had that question, I had to go find answers. And it wasn't a lazy activity. It wasn't an intellectual activity. It was work. I mean, I had to go crack open a couple of books, do some Google searches, have some courageous conversations, because there are uncomfortable questions, until you accumulate the type of information and knowledge that someone like Paul Reeves has. Paul Reeves has those answers because he asked the question and then he went digging for the answers. And we have to do that, especially if you want to be an ally. You have to formulate that question and then start to study and try to understand. I started this particular search on dealing with religion and racism 15 years ago. And I'm still working on it. So Alice likes to say we like cookie cutter answers, right? Alice, just tell me what the simple answer is and I can go do it. But it's really not that simple. And even when it is simple, it still requires a lot of work. How can I get my daughter's hair to look better? Well, every morning you're going to have to get up in the morning if you've adopted a little black girl and do what little black mamas do. That's what you're going to have to do. It's simple, but it's continual. It's on an ongoing basis. So even if the answer is simple, it still is going to require some commitment over time. My next question here for the panel. Much of the larger historical parts of civil rights legislation occurred in the 60s and 70s, with some progressive things being added over the years. Religion seems to be the greatest supporter of the change. However, at the same time, the biggest frustration to the change. And starting with Ron, what in your mind accounts for that?
I think you set me up, Lud.
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
I've lived here for almost 50 years, as I said before. And I expect to die here and be buried here. And I'm good with that. The toughest time for me to live in Utah takes place every year when the legislature is in session, as I'm overwhelmed by their general indifference and ignorance to the needs of the entire population as opposed to a certain segment of the population. And I think that for me, one of the biggest problem is that we let our differences take precedent over our sameness. And ultimately, we refuse to share the human experience. We're more alike than different. You said something about if you have children who are black. I have girls, 2 black girls, and I can't do hair. But I found a friend, you know Kathy. She had twins of her own. She was doing her girls' hair anymore. 2 more wasn't going to make a difference, so I sent them there. And my point is, we have to reach out.
It's true.
And don't allow the minimal stuff of differences overcome the more that we have in common. And be open to share that and embrace it. I've always assumed that my children would marry people who look like them. And that certainly has not been the case. But that was their choice. And I respect the right of anybody to marry who they want to, whom they find love in. And so when I look at my Italian son-in-law, he's American Italian, or my red-headed daughter-in-law, they're all part of my family. And, you know, you often said what the Bible says. Well, the Bible says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And there's a chapter in Luke 12, verse 48. It's really become the thing that girds me in terms of my life. And that is, to whom much is given, much is required. I expect to take that out to whatever the name of the cemetery she's going to drop me in. So.
Thank you. Thank you. You want to address that possibly, Betty? Do I need to ask the question again?
Of course, Ron always throws me.
Okay. So much of the larger historical parts of the civil rights legislation occurred in the 60s and the 70s. Religion seems to be the greatest supporter of the change. At the same time, the biggest frustration to the change. In your mind, what accounts for that?
I think there's always been this struggle with religion and how that's supposed to play out in life, individual family, individually ourselves, and to the broader community. We know that for African Americans in this country, religion was that place we found solace following slavery. And we were able to, in my mind, transcend the parts of religion that people were using to oppress us to find a new freedom. I was thinking about the movie Amistad, when he looked at the pictures in the Bible and saw the light and Jesus ascending up into heaven and said, oh, I can be free. I don't have to live in bondage. So we were able to pull those parts of it together to support our own identity and the fact that even though we were having these experiences, this wasn't the ultimate way things were supposed to be. And so I'm a child of the civil rights movement. I was one of 10 students that was selected to integrate my local high school in Maryland. And like religion, that part of it, it was this war that was going on and how I would react to the things that were happening around me. I was raised to believe that we're all equal in God's sight, that no one's better than I am, we're different. God sought to make this rainbow of people over the world, and as Ron said, we treat people like we want to be treated, and if we did those things, everything else would work out. Those things weren't working out. I saw these big differences and lived those differences. Segregated bathrooms, segregated schools, segregated everything. And so when I went to church, that was my place of solace. I was surrounded by people that looked like me, acted like me, believed like me for the most part, and found great joy. As I looked into the history books, I discovered that that wasn't always the same and had not always been the same. So I even had to reconcile personally my relationship with God and religion based on what I was actually experiencing by people that say they love God and they were treating me this way because God told them to. It's like, that's not working for me. Something is wrong here. And so coming to grips with all of that. But during the civil rights movement, our church had to step up to take leadership in that movement for freedom, justice, and equality. And not everybody believed that that's what the church should do. The church was to pray and help, not to be on the front line marching and fighting for policies. I was listening to letters from the Birmingham jail, and we're all familiar with that when the white clergy sent Dr. King a letter saying, "Why you out here acting up and marching? You know, just wait. It'll be okay. We can negotiate these things." And we know that for us, wait has almost always meant it's not going to happen. So the church was what helped propel us to those sweeping civil rights changes that took place in our country. And I think for all of us in the confines of our own religious settings, we will have to push. If our churches aren't responding the way we think they should, if there are belief systems and practices in them that are contrary to what we believe God's ultimate law is, it's our responsibility. We are the members. And so we help make up that body. We just can't say it's somebody over there. We are those members, and it's our responsibility to challenge and to push and to seek answers.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little piece on to what Betty said, because I sometimes think that because we don't fully understand or appreciate the influence and domination that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has over the large majority segments of this population. And and I don't know what your politics are, I know what mine are, but I was very, very disheartened when the local senior citizen came to Utah and celebrated the interests of the current administration and made it so that it appeared as though the church leadership endorsed whatever was being done. That in combination with the governor, it made me sick. And very, very disappointed of living here then, because it symbolized that really others outside of the mainstream are not welcomed here.
I'm going to follow up with you real quick, Ron, because that was actually a question I had written down. So I'm going to follow up with you on that question right now. How can we achieve reconciliation and injustice in this society and in church, especially in the face of that dominant religion?
You got to do the right thing, blood. Just do the right thing. And we know what is right and we know what is wrong. We all got 5 senses. There's some very smart, bright people sitting out here. Sometimes it takes an act of courage to call to task people that we love and admire and had the utmost respect for. it's hard. And I remember, I loved my mother. I had the utmost respect for her. I was scared of her as well. But she made a comment one day, and I was highly offended by it. It just was something wrong. I didn't expect it, and I said to her, and I called her on it, and I was waiting for her just to tear me a new one. And she said, "Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I hadn't thought of that."
Wow.
I think that part of our duty, according to the late, great historian John Hope Franklin, when someone asks him about black history and educating, bringing the large majority population, he said that, "I'm afraid that we're going to be about the business of educating white people about black people in this country for a long, long time to come." And it's a shared responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of black people, but it's part of the business that we're about right now. This conference, we couldn't have had a conference like this 40 years ago. So I think we've made tremendous strides, and I say kudos to the church and also to the Tanner Humanities Center and the leadership role that it's played.
So on a backtrack to the civil rights question, when I was at Emory, I had the great privilege to be a researcher for the Martin Luther King Papers Project under Dr. Claiborne Carson and Virginia Shadron. And one of the things that stood out after studying not only his life, but other ministers' lives who were involved in the movement is that they lived black. They supported black businesses. Dr. King often ate at the Beautiful. That was one of his favorite restaurants. He thrived in the black church. He lived in black communities. The focus and the problem that I see is that the focus got changed in the civil rights movement from pursuing equal access to having people change the conversation to make it about integration. And last night we talked about the social and sexual integration concerns that white people have. And as Ms. Betty mentioned, the letter from the Birmingham jail that Dr. King wrote in response to the white clergy of Alabama basically telling him, "You are outside agitator and you have no business here." He had to speak to him and make it very plain that he was not an outside agitator. But the thing is, it was the clergy that was pumping the brakes on progress. Not just integration, as we often talk about, but the real civil rights movement is about equal access to all public accommodations, education, employment. The whole movement was things like, don't shop where you can't work. And that gets pushed under the rug a lot, under the whole umbrella of let's get along and let's be in love, and I don't want you to say anything bad about me because it hurts my feelings. That's not what the civil rights movement was about. It was about pursuing equal access to remove legal discrimination so that people could have options, that they could live and pursue their lives in its entirety. But that did not mean leaving everything that they had known that was beneficial. So you don't throw away everything that's working for you to go and move into environments where you're the only one. That wasn't the goal. That happens as a byproduct, but that was not the goal. And so I think that that was one of the biggest problems that the church has, being an instigator of change, but also being an obstacle to change, is that got lost in translation during the civil rights movement.
because we like to do that too. If I have done anything, you know you did something, or you wouldn't be up here saying it, okay? So let's stop pretending. Let's just stop pretending. We should be settled on that point. We have a horrific history around racism, discrimination, horrible treatment of people that look like me, okay, and others as well. So let's get that clear and stop, well, it wasn't me, so why? Or just forget it. You know, we have a large part of the ministry of the LDS Church is genealogy and knowing your history. So why do you want me to forget my history? I'm not forgetting, okay? Unapologetically black, and like you, I went to some schools that didn't teach me anything about who I am, where I came, other than slavery. That was the whole history lesson. When I went to the integrated school, it got so bad where the white kids would say, it's okay, Betty. You know, again, being the only one in the classroom. So in order to move forward, we have to first admit that that is a part of our history, and I benefited from that history. Okay, and in order to change, I need to do A, B, and C, and that work has to happen together and collectively. The NAACP, our national board, met right before the B1 event that was held, and as a part of that meeting between the first presidency and the national board of the NAACP, they laid out 3 goals, and they were disaster relief, education, and civic projects as places that we could start working together and looking at our commonalities. But in order to move that from some writing on a piece of paper or a statement that was made publicly, then it's going to take us holding people accountable. It's going to take us working together and pushing the envelope, or things will just go back as usual, because that's our comfort zone. Why? You know, people ask me all the time, why do you do this? I'm just not satisfied with the way things are. If they're not right, if they're not working for the majority of people, then I can't be satisfied with that. My mother was a civil rights worker. I was drugged everywhere, to every meeting, every rally. It's in my blood. And so, but I can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. We have to work collectively and first, again, admit that we have problems. We've been a part of the problem, and let's work together to be a part of that solution.
You know, today we have available more information about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and African or blacks and their relationship with the church than we've ever had before. When I first started researching, since the primary book for history of blacks in Utah was Kate Carter's Negro Pioneers. And I would still go back and say that she has to be commended for the work that was laid out. That was the beginning. But the work that my former colleague, Paul Reeve, and his mentor, Dean May, and work that Professor Goldberg, there's a wealth of information out there. And I had to give a plug for an online source of material. The best online website for African and African American history is blackpast.org. And 2 years ago, I believe, Paul, the founder of that website really said, he said, I got to have a section on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and blacks in the church. And Darius Gray, Margaret Young, and others got together, and if you want to find out about blacks, African and African American history in general, you go to that website. And also, if you want to look up something about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and blacks, there's a section within that website devoted to that. And Dr. Taylor, Quintar Taylor, he said, we would be incomplete without it. So you all tell him I did my job. I want my royalty.
And I have to say, Ron, that's important because that's where we plug in a lot of those missing parts that many of us miss. Blackpast.org, you're going to go on there and you're going to find quite a few things that's been put on there by Ron himself. So he's just not talking it, he's doing it. So look at that, especially when you want to know about the history of the church, because when you get to the section that says Utah, most of those black folks in blackpast.org under Utah are going to be members of the LDS Church. Okay? So just take a look at that and see some of the stories and some of the struggles that we've had. And so, Audia,
Yes.
your bio mentioned that you managed 3 areas. What was it? Iowa, Illinois, and what was that other place with just corn in it?
Missouri,
Missouri. So,
our favorite place.
as a manager in the LDS Church, and how do racial perceptions shape or affect what you do as a service provider for those areas? And I'm thinking probably Missouri and Iowa being largely white.
So I have notes because I could talk about this for a long time. So these comments are not representative of Self-Reliance services, so don't be going running back telling them that I was speaking on their behalf. But this is my experience based on my work. So one, I am both privileged and burdened to say that I am the first African American woman working in this church operation, and I am the only in the entire world.
Wow.
Let that sink in. And there's only 2 African Americans, period, in the entire world, and the other is male in Atlanta. So there's still that historically. And so I am often the first black person in a perceived leadership role in the church that many have encountered, and sometimes it is not well received. I've had missionaries tell me I didn't know what I was talking about, and they would not follow my counsel, my direction. They would not work for me, and they did not. I'm gonna skip that. So in my role, I also travel to these places by car. Much of the time I travel by car. Iowa, Missouri, and most of Illinois are not places where there are an abundance of blacks outside the major city. And so they are also sometimes not receptive to black people being in those areas, and they have flags and signs and other indicators to let me know to keep it moving as I go by. So I really have to plot out my routes, my stops, my meals. I feel like I'm traveling by Green Book, right? I consider brand reputation.
Can I stop you for a moment? Everybody knows what a Green Book is?
The Green Book used to be what blacks would have with them that identified all of the safe places for blacks to travel, hotels, or, well, not hotels, but people's homes, gas stations, places where they could get gas, food, etc., use the restroom. So they would have this book called the Green Book, and they would go by that, and that's how they maneuvered and traveled from place to place. So, you know, jokingly, one manager asked me, "You have a lot of McDonald's receipts. You really like McDonald's?" And I said, "No, not so much. But they have bathrooms, they have cameras, they have security, and they have a reputation that I think that they will guard well. So if I disappear, people will know where I am, and something can be done about it." But that's a very real concern for me. Last year in, I believe it was September, the NAACP issued a travel ban for the state of Missouri. Main part of my job, right? So I said, yeah, I'm not going. And so I told them why, and we had this very extensive conversation about all the things that I have to deal with that my counterparts do not. The considerations of traveling alone as a single black female in many of these places, Ferguson, Missouri being one of the places that I go to. And so during this time, the police had murdered someone, and there was unrest, and then they took the stance of, we're going to take back the streets. You're not taking back the streets with me in them. So I was at home in Chicago, and I just would not go. But that is something that I had to explain to people who had never once considered historically my safety. Not that they were insensitive, they just never considered it because they don't have to. So they were very supportive of, my safety. And when I traveled, the memory of Sandra Bland, who was murdered in police custody, was from DuPage County, Illinois, where I lived in 2015. College educated, black woman, member of a historically black sorority, going to start a new phase in life, had just received a new job opportunity, and on a routine traffic stop, I say routine, traffic stop, ended up never seeing the light of day. I think about her, and I think about that it could be me every time that I have to go through these places. That is not something that my counterparts have to deal with. As a black woman, my key stakeholders, my internal clients, if you will, are Area 70s and stake presidents. I am often the only woman in the room, definitely the only black woman in the room, and I cannot meet with them alone. So it requires me to have a buddy. It requires me to make friends with their wives, to bring them with me, to have them in the room as a practice. And so the men don't have to think about these things, but they're very real security issues. They're confines, if you will, to my role and my work.
So, just out of curiosity, you mentioned this about having to work with men and having to find buddies so that you could do your job. How much effort or extra work is that to you, and how does that make you feel when recently there was a lot of discussions about bishops meeting or counseling women or counseling children when you find yourself in that situation?
I'm a firm believer in the buddy system. I was a full-time missionary. I served in Brussels, Belgium, and so that was drilled into me that we need a partner, like Timothy and Paul. I wouldn't do a mission for 17 years, but that, you need somebody to have your back and to be a witness sometimes. And so I think it's nothing wrong with having a sister with you or a brother with you if you're going to meet with them. But in my role, it does make my work harder in that I have to be more creative in how I have the meetings necessary to understand what's going on in those areas and to be some type of influence in what goes on to provide the services for those that need them. So it does create more work on my part to be able to fulfill that.
Thank you. Let's see what our time looks like. Okay, so we got about 15 minutes. So I'm going to go to Betty here real quick. We're going to try to get a couple more questions in. Betty, as the president of the newly formed Utah Black Roundtable, how do you see UBR contributing to helping the larger community to become more mindful of racism, and do you see it as a means of creating a better relationship with the LDS Church?
The Utah Black Roundtable, just a little background, for the past 4 years, as a part of our Utah Juneteenth celebration and commemoration, we've had a town hall meeting on the state of Black Utah, and we brought people in from all over the state to have conversation. And those conversations, we collected that information, and last year decided that in order to address some of the concerns that were brought up, we needed some type of infrastructure. And this infrastructure is the Utah Black Roundtable, a coalition of individuals, organizations, and congregations that have said, yes, we want to work together on a strategic plan to improve the life of African Americans living in the state of Utah and make Utah a better place for all. And so I believe that even in being here today, I've had flashbacks several times to conversations I had 30 years ago in Utah, 20 years ago in Utah, and 10 years ago in Utah, and did not think that we would be at this place having these general kinds of conversations and needs to develop strategies to improve public education, higher education, retention and graduation, finding jobs, dismantling discrimination in the workplace, wealth inequality and those kind of gaps, and making sure that we all were getting equal pay for the kind of work we were doing. But the Black Roundtable is there because of these grave disparities that continue to exist in our communities. And for us and the events that happen with the NAACP National Board, for me, that opens up another door for us to be able to work across ethnic and racial boundaries, political, economic, religious, if we really believe that this is the best that we can do when only about 70% of African American youth are graduating from high school, then that's not working for me. And it's not because they're less smart. When you look here now, we're only a couple of generations removed from slavery, when we weren't allowed to read or write or go to school, and we have PhDs and others. So it's not that we don't have the capacity. There's something going on institutionally that is keeping these gaps moving and growing.